So the first film, was focused more on the personal, like what you eat affects you, and help with health or performance, right? And we touched on sustainability towards the end of the film. The second film is going to be more on the interpersonal, so what you eat affects other people and the planet more. So some of the topics we're looking at, kids' health, but also food justice and access to food, and a lot about sustainability in the planet. As you know, there's huge impacts of what people eat on the environment and sustainability.
Hey, James, thanks for being here with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it just seems like this interview was meant to be after having just gotten back from the Organic Produce Summit, where I was there. And I was just telling you this before we started recording, with Dotsie Bausch and Jim Loomis and Derek Morgan on a panel.
Yeah.
We were speaking to organic produce farmers, and it was so interesting. And I'm curious your take on this. When I think about dairy, and they have this huge, marketing organization that is really good at what they do, right? And they've brainwashed the whole world into thinking dairy is good for you. There's nothing like that. I mean, we are not seeing ads for broccoli, and we're not seeing ads for kale. Where is the marketing organization for produce, the food that's actually, healing people and sustaining all of us vegans out there,
Yeah. I mean, I think the Got Milk campaign is probably one of the greatest campaigns of all time, right? And making people believe that it builds stronger bones, which of course it doesn't. We know there's an inverse correlation between countries that have the highest dairy, right, with the low, the hip fracture rates. So highest hip fracture rates. So, and I think they're not even allowed to make that claim anymore. Like dairy is good for your bones. I think it's illegal for them to make that claim now. But we definitely need more advocacy promoting, plant-based in general. I mean, the dairy lobby is so strong, and they've done a great job. And we definitely need some people on the plant-based side and the produce side for sure.
On the marketing side, yeah, absolutely. Well, before we dive into any of that, I like to kind of start with something a little more personal. So kind of a different type of question. And so here's what I want to know. Behind all the accolades in your bio, right, and the belts and the championships and the documentaries and the entrepreneurial experiences, can you tell us who is James Wilks?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. No one's ever asked me that before. I mean, a big part of my being is sort of truth seeking. And I don't know why that is. It's I hate being lied to. And, I was on this search for truth in combat originally, right? Bruce Lee would say, research your own experience, absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. And when I, got injured and started looking into and came across a search about the gladiators, the research, that's when I went on for this, use that same mindset for the search for truth in nutrition. But I've always been a sort of truth seeker, I think, which is at the core of everything I do. And so winning the Ultimate Fighter or producing the Game Changers are really manifestations of that deep desire to find out the truth. Basically, I'm not honestly not really sure where that comes from. I know I hate being lied to, and I feel like I was lied to by. There's a lot of stuff there's a lot of correlations actually between like the martial arts. There's a lot of BS in the martial arts world.
Yeah. People
teaching stuff that doesn't work, and I feel it's the same in sort of the diet space. Teaching all, espousing all these diets that just aren't based on the evidence. But I'm not really sure where that search for truth comes from, honestly.
Yeah, I was curious about that. And, I kind of think of people's chapters, my own included, or people's lives in terms of chapters, right? And so I wanted to start kind of thinking pre-Game Changers chapter, and most people are so resistant to change in general, right? And eating in particular, that really gets people, and I'm curious what drove you so hard as an athlete and I guess it's this question of this truth seeking, like, and you just said you didn't know, but you have any clue as to, what allowed you to be open to seeking the truth, even though that would mean that you were going to have to change everything about the way you were eating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think when I set out, I didn't realize that it would change. I mean, I do think, having looked at a lot of the behavioral psychology research now, I understand why people are so resistant to change, especially when it comes to diet. And it turns out that it's based on their identity. So especially when, eating is a lot, especially meat eating, especially with men, for example, we know that meat eating is really tied to their identity as who they are, like the hunter, the man, sort of dominate the world and the planet. And so I understand why. And I think I had some of that myself, because I really thought it wasn't just as like, oh, I think humans need meat. And it wasn't just, oh, I think athletes need meat for protein. I really thought as a man, I needed meat. And so I think if someone had just pitched me the idea, I would have been very resistant to change. In fact, I did have one of my good friends is a vegetarian. I've been talking to me for years about, being vegetarian. And I was very resistant, and especially just being a man, I just thought, obviously there's not really a big difference in terms of nutritional needs there, and other than more calories. I mean, there's some nuances for sure, like iron needs might be higher for women at certain times of the month, or but generally, like, it's not like men need meat and women don't, or whatever. It was sort of a silly notion that I sort of believed, honestly, years ago before I dug into it. I wasn't really aware. I think if you'd have said, hey, by the way, if you dig into this, you're going to end up being eating only plants, I think I probably would have been pretty resistant. But it was as the sort of truth uncovered itself, it was sort of by steps. And also when I made the change, I didn't make a change saying, okay, I'm going vegan for the rest of my life. I thought, okay, I'll try this. I've seen the evidence. I've talked to some of these nutrition experts. I've seen some of these other athletes doing it. I'll try it and see how it goes. And then I just sort of stuck with it. So it wasn't like if you'd have said to me, hey, start digging into research and you're going to end up being vegan or something, I think I would have been super resistant. But yeah, I really don't know I'm quite analytical. And, I believe in the scientific method to uncover things. And so, yeah, I don't like being lied to by people or by industry or by marketing. But I'm not can't pinpoint like where that goes back to in my life.
The other thing I'm curious about is how, if it's learned or innate, how well you are under pressure. And, we think about just fighting a competition from that standpoint. Also in the debate with Chris Kresser, I was so stressed out listening to that debate. That was so intense. And I was like, this is amazing, for you to be able to, what tools do you use? Is that something you've had since you were a little kid? Maybe the martial arts component has come into that, Bruce Lee.
Yeah, I think the martial arts is massive, right? Because you're like any of these sort of business meetings or the documentary, it's not the same as like laying on the floor and someone smashing your face and your nose is broken and you're bleeding. Like, doesn't quite compare. And so I think that you get a lot of, grit, determination, persistence. There's all sorts of things that you get from doing martial arts, especially mixed martial arts or wrestling or jiu-jitsu or boxing. I think there's a lot of things that you get from that can translate over into real life. In fact, even some of the concepts of martial arts, Bruce Lee would talk about economy of motion or risk to reward ratio. Even some of those things cross over into business and other parts of life. But that grit and determination and resiliency, right, and all of those things, I think they cross over. And I think having that background makes it easier to push through on the documentary, on business, and that type of thing. Yeah,
absolutely. I don't know if I've practiced Muay Thai for 20 plus years, and
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just see it, when you're in those sparring situations, it's like this meditation because there literally can't be anywhere else. Right. I mean, you literally cannot, or you're done. And it's that skill of being present and is so useful in every other area.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's why I still love I do jiu-jitsu. I don't do sort of boxing and kickboxing as much. I do a lot of jiu-jitsu. But even riding my motorcycle is the same thing. It's like totally, you have to be totally focused and you forget everything else, which is also great for all the stress and anxiety of life as well to do that stuff.
Yeah. One of the things that I didn't hear a lot of on other interviews is how you got into martial arts, because it's especially into the UFC, considering you don't have the typical story of most UFC fighters, right? Who kind of came from street fighting as a kid. Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, well, fighting's been in my family a bit. So even though I had a very fortunate upbringing in England, my grandfather was 14 or 15 when he faked his birth certificate and went and fought in World War II. So he was dropped down. He was one of the only people, I think the only person that survived in his troop. They were under machine gun fire, and he dove in a river and escaped. And then when he came out of World War II, I think he still had that fighting spirit. So he would get into fights at pubs and things, which is obviously not a great thing. But then my dad was into Kung Fu, and then my uncle became a top-ranked karate fighter in the UK. In fact, he got one of the fastest knockouts in the Kyokushinkai karate, which is actually quite a aggressive sort of real full contact style of karate. And so it was sort of in my blood a little bit, or from the family. And so my dad put me into karate when I was at a young age, and then stopped for a while, and then did taekwondo. And when I went to university, I was spending more time studying martial arts and combat sports than I was for my degree. So I was doing boxing with a former Olympic boxing coach, Japanese jiu-jitsu, Wing Chun Kung Fu, kickboxing. And then I sort of got into this Jeet Kune Do, which was Bruce Lee's system. And that sort of opened my eyes a lot to, where it was very synergistic, where it was like search for truth. It's take this bit from here and this bit from here, not eclectically in blocks, but what would fit together well, and sort of see what works for you. And sort of just applied that mindset, and martial arts just became, what I was completely focused on. I moved to the US after I finished my degree at 22 years old. I came here to train with the guy that developed the Navy SEAL unarmed combat program. And so I was really sort of focused on street self-defense and training in the military and that type of stuff. And then, if you're athletic and you're sort of, maybe you've got a competitive nature, you feel like you want to compete. And so I'm not going to go out on the street and pick fights, right? But the UFC and MMA was the closest thing to that, with the limited rules. And so that sort of drew me into the sports side of things, even though it wasn't my main focus. So that's sort of how I got into that.
Mm-hmm. And then how did you actually get into the UFC, into the show?
Yeah, so I'd have a professional MMA fight. There's the UFC, which is the premier organization of mixed martial arts. And then there's all these sort of tier B, tier C organizations. And every year I'd have a fight or two, or maybe I'd take 2 years off and have a fight, just sort of for fun. It was a professional fight, but I was just doing it for fun, not for the money. And then it was really because I was turning 30 years old, and I was teaching martial arts out of my garage and at a local gym, and I wasn't really doing much. And I was about to be 30, and I said to my roommate, so I could beat all those guys on the Ultimate Fighter reality show. And they said, well, don't just say it, go and do it. So I thought, okay, yeah, I'll do that. So it was really just to sort of prove to myself. And I just felt like I wasn't doing much of substance other than I enjoyed teaching. I enjoyed teaching people how to defend themselves, that type of thing. And I enjoyed training. But I thought, well, I'll give it a go. I don't want to look back and say I could have been in the UFC. So I basically tried out for the Ultimate Fighter, and then it was the UK versus USA, and I won that season, which gives you a contract in the UFC. Got
it. Yes. And from yours, if you put yourself back in your shoes at around that time, did you see your identity as a fighter once you got into that space? And did you see that as your future for at least the next, 5, 6?
It was quite funny because when I did the Ultimate Fighter, I only had the goal of winning it. And then when I won it, I was like, oh no, now I've got a professional fighter. And actually I didn't enjoy it anywhere near as much once I was getting paid, and now it felt like a job. So yeah, so I did identify as a fighter. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff in my childhood that made me think I had to prove myself and be tough, to be honest. And so that's probably a big driving factor. And because my family was full of fighters, but
yeah, what when you were a kid that made you feel like you have to prove?
A couple of things. Well, when I was 15, I got into I looked at someone, their partner she was walking along, and this guy said, what the F are you looking at? And I said, oh, nothing. And the funny thing is, he reached in, he said, do you see this? And I looked in, I said, yeah. And he went, bang. So it was just a tap.
Oh, shit.
My nose was bleeding. And I was so shocked that I fell for it a second time. He said, well, you see this one? And I was like, yeah. And then he hit me again in the mouth. So my nose and my mouth was bleeding. And I was doing some taekwondo at the time. And realized that I just didn't have, like, it just wasn't, I wasn't used to the reality of actual combat in the street. And at that moment, I thought, that's never going to happen to me again. And I said, I'm going to get 5 black belts. Not that that's important. And I do have like the 5 black belts or the equivalent now. But that was definitely an inciting moment that made me think, yeah, I'm never going to let someone like push me around or bully me like that. That was it. And I think just my sort of family being fighters and those expectations, and, you know, I think also just trying to show to my dad I was tough too, like some of that stuff when you really look back at it. So all of that is quite funny, really, when you start examining and going, why did I do all of that? Because it's quite a lot to spend your whole, like, 20 years of your life just trying to become the best fighter possible.
Right. Right. Do you put a ton of pressure on yourself in all areas still to this day?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why the documentary was successful, not just with me, but with Joseph Pace, who was the other producer and main writer of the film. I mean, we said before we started, this will be the most viewed documentary of all time. I think people thought we were a bit crazy because we'd never made a documentary before. We didn't go to school for documentaries. And so I think high expectations and like a strong belief in myself, but then also feeling like you're not doing enough, those combination of things make you strive to do good things, but which can obviously be stressful as well often. But yeah, same with that. And then the new business that we just launched, it's all just striving for something massive, I think.
Yeah. That's a tough balance, right? To know that you've got to have that grit and the determination and high expectations to put yourself out there and to shoot high and to be successful. And yet that can be a pretty tough road internally, emotionally.
Oh yeah, no, it's been making the documentary was very challenging. There was 3 or 4 times where Joseph and I completely ran out of money, maxed out the credit cards, trying to get it made. So there was a few times that it could have folded completely. We just kept pushing through, and that persistence.
Pushing through in terms of finding more funding and getting more people,
hiring the right people. Yeah, I mean, we put it on hold. We actually we hired some people in 2013 and we shot some footage then, and we just felt like we needed a really good storyteller. And so in 2014, we put everything on hold to raise more money and to really put a good team together. And we didn't start filming until 2015. And I originally, we thought about the idea in 2011, 2012. It took a long time. It didn't come out 2019. So it was years of hard work. And we hadn't made a film before. So there's 50 people that we filmed in 4 continents that didn't make the film, which obviously upset a lot of people. But that's unfortunately the nature of documentaries. You'll film some stuff and then see what fits into the storyline. But we definitely could have filmed less had we been more planned. And that's what we're doing now. We're making a second documentary, and we're putting more work up front into figuring out what's the storyline's going to be and who's going to be in it to cut that down somewhat.
Got it. And so, are you able to tell us anything about the second one? I know this is at the beginning.
So we're currently in pre-production and we'll be starting to film soon. But so the first film, was focused more on the personal, like what you eat affects you and help with health or performance, right? And we touched on sustainability towards the end of the film. The second film is going to be more on the interpersonal, so what you eat affects other people and the planet more. So some of the topics we're looking at, kids' health, but also food justice and access to food, and a lot about sustainability in the planet. As you know, there's huge impacts of what people eat on the environment and sustainability. And so we don't have the exact storyline yet, but we are trying to plan it more this time, so we're not spending years filming people that don't make it. Yeah, you
certainly have the experience now. And just if you could take a second to, I'm going to say brag, but the Game Changers effect. I mean, this film had massive effects in this world. Can you just share a little bit about that?
Well, by conservative estimates, you don't get you don't get numbers from Netflix. We're also in Youku in China, which has twice the viewers of Netflix, about 800 million viewers. And so you don't get exact, but there's a lot of metrics that we've been able to pick up. We also use some Nielsen data. So by conservative estimates, it seems to be by far the most viewed documentary of all of any kind of all time. So we had, conservative estimate of over 200 million views. We had over 1.5 billion media impressions. in the first few months, including over 40,000 organic press articles written about the film. And then interest in plant-based eating more than tripled worldwide within a few weeks of the film's release, according to metrics on Google Trends. And then there is some data showing, third-party data showing that 75% of the increased interest in plant-based eating since 2002 is a result of the film. So yeah, it had a massive impact. We also had research showing 1 in 10 American adults have seen the film, and 1 in 100 Americans have been to our website. Like on some days, we've had 600,000 people looking at a single recipe on our website.
So I know you've spouted those statistics so many times, but how does that really feel? Like, are you connected with that, the massiveness of what you were the catalyst for?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I want to also give credit to everyone on the team.
Sure.
It was a team effort for sure. And especially Joseph Pace, the main writer and other producer who's been vegan now for, I think, 30 years, and has done a lot of great stuff in the space. So I don't want to take, obviously, all the credit for it. But yeah, it had a big impact. But to me, it's just nowhere near enough. And so, and I sort of, like, Men's Health, because of the film, not really because of me, they listed me as the 3rd most influential man in health and fitness in 2020, and The Rock came 4th. And for like 10 minutes, I was like feeling pretty good about it. And then after that, I was like, I wasn't 1st though, So maybe it's just never enough. Doesn't matter what it is, And I was sort of bummed. And then I think, well, if I hadn't have even been on the list, I wouldn't have known about it. I should just be happy with. But at the time, the number 1 person was related to pandemics, and obviously was given that topic at the time was listed as number 1, and then someone else was in like fitness, and then so in terms of food, I was at the 1st position. But yeah, I just feel like it's not enough. I think for all of the reasons, for both public health, I think people are dying and having disease unnecessarily, for what we're doing to the planet, for the animals, like for all of those reasons. We're taking grains away from countries in which people are starving to death to feed our animals. Like, I mean, it's madness, right? What's happening with the way that people are eating now. And so I just think there's just not enough, and we need to do more. So yeah, so definitely happy with what we did, but
you're not stopping.
Yeah.
No, I always think about it. I stopped eating animals when I was 7, and it was like, when you go to the eye doctor and they try out different lenses, on your eye. I don't know if you've, and it's like I felt my whole life I've been looking through the world through this different lens than most people, right? Yeah. So once I don't know if it's that you open your heart, you open your mind, you open your heart, you absorb, you're not afraid of changing the way you believe, changing your programming, that this new world opens up. And I feel like that's that shift in consciousness that we're trying to do. And what you did with the documentary, The Eating Our Way to Extinction, was a phenomenal film. I saw that last year and so powerful. I wish, did that get much traction? I don't hear about that one that much.
So Joseph and I were executive producers on that with Kate Winslet and a couple of other folks, but it wasn't our film. We helped with some of the storyline, and where we helped with getting some funds for the marketing and a few other things that we helped with. But yeah, it didn't get the same traction in the way that the Game Changers did. I think they could have done with more marketing funds to get it out there. But also, the information obviously was great in Eating Our Way to Extinction, and the cinematography was amazing, and scientifically it was on point. But I think the Game Changers had that sort of that sports and more exciting. And then we had those visuals, like with the erection scene and then the blood flow.
Totally.
And so instead of having a lot of talking heads, we had obviously some talking heads and experts on there, but there was sort of a narrative in there and some sort of cool, exciting footage. And I think that's what you need really if you want to get, masses amounts of people to watch it.
Yeah.
That's the challenge. Yeah, it's a challenge making a documentary, because you're trying to get across some facts and science. So you've got to find that balance between sort of education and entertainment, what we're now calling edutainment. You've got to find that balance. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And so I'm curious, when it comes to your heart right now, like putting aside messaging and the market and what people want to see, what are you feeling most passionate about, most connected to when it comes to the plant-based movement, we could call the vegan, whatever you want to call it, but, moving this world towards eating plants, what's, from sustainability to, I don't hear you ever really, I haven't heard you talk much about animals, health and performance. Where's your heart taking you?
Yeah, I mean, personally, it was a pretty selfish perspective. Obviously, originally when I was injured and I was looking for the optimal nutrition for recovery, and then after that for performance. And then with my dad having a heart attack, realizing the same biological mechanisms that affect performance in the short run affect the health in the long run. So blood flow, inflammation, endothelial function, the lining of your arteries, producing nitric oxide, all those things sort of manifest as, if they're not doing well in the short term, they manifest in the long term of these diseases and these leading killers, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and so forth. And so performance and health was sort of originally, I was coming performance first, health second. But then I think once you realize that meat and animal products aren't normal, natural, and necessary, you drop down like this cognitive barrier and you accept all of these, you start accepting some of these ethical and environmental truths that you otherwise might not have accepted. Because if you believe that meat's normal, natural, necessary, then you're not going to be as open to those things. Yeah. So it definitely sort of opened my eyes up to those areas. And, I think all of the factors, it's hard to really say, well, we need to go plant-based for this specific reason. I mean, I think the planet's screwed if we don't do that. I think it's the biggest thing that anyone can do is shift toward more plant-forward diet, and preferably all the way to plants if they really want to do the best they can. But yeah, it's hard to pinpoint an exact, because it's like a win-win-win, right?
Right.
So your health, the animals, and the planet. I do think, the planet is really in danger if we don't shift towards more plant-forward eating. And these other solutions that people are coming up with, like the holistic grazing, right? Or regenerative ranching, whatever you want to call it, as part of regenerative agriculture. I think there's definitely some benefits to regenerative agriculture, but regenerative grazing, holistic grazing, or regenerative ranching has sort of stolen that term of regenerative agriculture, because there's certainly a lot of plant regenerative agriculture we could do. They're coming at that as a solution. It's really not the solution at all. The methane that the cows produce. Harvard and Boston University did a study in 2018 showing you need somewhere between, I think, like 60 and 250% more land if you just have grass-fed, grass-finished beef, and then it doubles again if it was holistic grazing, where they're moving the cattle around. And Emily Cassidry, who's the senior science writer for NASA, put together a paper showing that if we just fed food so if we just grew food for human consumption, we'd be able to feed an additional 4 billion people. And there's just not enough land to do this holistic grazing. It's not the answer. So really shifting towards plant-forward eating is really the only solution. And so I do think that is a huge motivator for me too, because I want to leave the planet for my children and grandchildren, in a decent state.
And all of that seems, I mean, there's scientific, evidence and all that, but that just seems very logical. I mean, it just seems, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, no system is 100% efficient, right? So like around 33 calories into a cow to get 1 calorie out. I mean, most people should understand that cutting out the middleman concept, because after all, one of the big things that we talk about in the film is like animals are just the middlemen for protein. Like the protein doesn't originate in animals, they get it from plants. So you can cut that middleman out, go straight to the source. And not only do you get the protein, but you get the benefits of the plants from the phytonutrients and the fiber and all that sort of stuff that the cows often would be utilizing, or whatever other animals you might be eating. So yeah, to me, it's totally logical. I mean, you want to also eat as low on the food chain as possible, because then you minimize the bioaccumulation and biomagnification of toxins and PCBs and furans and all these things that exist in the environment. So from an economical perspective, from a land use perspective, from a emissions perspective, from water use, water pollution, biodiversity perspective, it's just better to get the nutrients originally from the source, and that's plants. And yeah, I think a lot of it is tied to identity. People buy into marketing. Obviously, habit is a big thing. People have been eating the same way for years of their life, a few times a day. So it is challenging to change. There's obviously a lot more food options now and options at restaurants and things, at least in the developed world. And again, so we have the Game Changers Institute, which is a research, education, and advocacy platform promoting plant-forward eating. And we are using that term plant forward. And to me, it's like, it's hard to push everyone and say, hey, you should be vegan or vegetarian. We're not trying to do that from our nonprofit. We're trying to say plant forward eating. We say it's all or something, not all or nothing. And, you know, people will make their own. I don't think I should be telling anyone what they should be eating. And hopefully they shift as much as possible towards, you know, plant-based, but not everyone's going to do that in the short term. So,
well, I think, you know, nobody wants to hear someone else telling them what to eat. So, you know, just considering the psychology and being smart around our messaging is so important. And are you a Dr. Melanie Joy fan?
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. The normal necessary. Yeah.
Someone actually necessary. Yeah. That's
what yeah. I had her on the show. She's amazing.
Oh, she's great. Yeah.
She's fabulous. So considering all these challenges and where we are in the state of the planet, how do you feel about our future in terms of your level of optimism, hopefulness? How do you, does it change from one day to the next? I know it does for me.
Yeah. And I think that unfortunately, we only have a few years left. I know that sounds unrealistic to most people. I think we've got a few years left to really shift people around towards more plant-based eating in terms of the planetary health. But I am hopeful, and I think that it can get done. So yeah, I'm hopeful. But I think we need all of these different efforts, right? Including Game Changers too.
Yes. Yay. Do we have any idea of like when that's going to be?
2025, hopefully.
25. Okay.
Yeah, that's when it should, by the time we film and edit and do the music and color correction and all of this stuff. Yeah, that's the goal.
All right. I will be waiting on that one. So one thing I know about the movie is that you guys really didn't accept, you know, sponsorships. I don't know how that all worked. Like, just you wanted it to be as legit, and you didn't want people to be able to argue that you were paid off on anything. So how did that just affect your own personal journey and your journey when it comes to being an entrepreneur and the new venture that you have now with the protein?
Yeah, well, it was challenging because there was a few times, like I said, where we ran out of money, and there were companies trying to offer us money for product placement in the film. And we said, no, this is not about promoting your product. It's going to destroy the credibility. And people are always going to attack it anyway. So, you know, people said, oh, well, some of the experts in the film have books about it, or James Cameron has an investment in a pea protein company. We never talked about pea protein. We certainly didn't talk about James Cameron's pea protein company. And he didn't make that investment until a few years after he'd given us funding for the film. Like, this wasn't related in any way. And obviously it makes sense if James Cameron believes that switching to more plant protein is beneficial, he's going to put his money, right? He's not doing that, you know, primarily to make money. He's doing that because he believes in the cause. And so, yeah, I mean, like, the film came out in 2019. The second film we're running through our nonprofit, which is a 501c3 from our perspective. So we've partnered with Spring Hill, which is LeBron James's media production company, and LeBron is on board as an executive producer, and James Cameron is back, and some of the other big names that we had before are getting behind it. But yeah, we also have the Fighter brand now, which is a separate entity where we've launched this elite plant protein as our flagship product. And so that we're keeping them separate, but obviously people are always going to say, oh, well, you made the documentary to sell this protein. I think we would have had the protein out a lot sooner if that had been the case, because it came out in 2019 and we just launched in June of 2023, this brand. So the only reason we launched that is people were asking, okay, what, you know, high protein, clean products are there that are delicious and convenient that meet the Game Changers strict criteria at the intersection of health and performance. Yeah. And I really couldn't recommend many, if any, that I really wanted to get behind. So some have got too much saturated fat, or they've got, you know, ingredients that you won't want to be consuming, or they don't taste great, or the texture's not great. And that's one of the biggest things with plant protein in general when you compare it to whey protein. And so we wanted to solve for that, which is what we've done. Yeah, so basically we decided to launch this brand, and we're going to have a series of products with that.
And yeah, no, and I'm really, I can't wait. By the time this comes out, I will have sampled it. So I'll be including that in the intro. I'm really excited because the flavors sound amazing. Well, you've got creamy chocolate, cafe latte, and caramel vanilla, I believe.
Yeah. So this is the bag, the Elite Plant Protein. So it's got 30 grams of protein, with 3 grams of fiber. So it's basically a blend of upcycled barley protein. So barley was the food of the gladiators, but per life cycle analysis, this upcycled barley is also the world's most sustainable protein. So it's got less water use, less land use, less pesticide use, less emissions than any other protein. And it's a sprouted ancient grain. And we've combined that with whole ground lupin, so a whole food in there, which is an ancient bean and soil regenerating crop. And so, we beat the top 2 leading brands 3-1 in consumer testing at the National Food Lab for taste and texture, and people are loving it. And one of the main things is that it goes places other protein can't go. So obviously you can mix it with water or plant-based milk. But I sometimes put 30 or 45 grams of protein in my coffee and it just disappears. It doesn't have the texture of normal plant protein.
That's super cool. I never heard of putting the plant protein in coffee.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, even with whey protein, you can't really do it. I know some people do it with collagen, and I've got issues with collagen, but obviously, it's just not what it's cracked up to be. But like my kids are always, when I made a smoothie, like, oh, there's protein powder in this because it's gritty, but they can't tell anymore. It just got the flavor, and then I'll put it into yogurt and mix it in for the kids or for myself actually. It doesn't have that gritty texture of normal plant protein, so it's pretty exciting.
And what makes it more sustainable? Can you explain that a little more?
Well, so it's first of all, I mean, barley is a fairly sustainable crop anyway, and as is the lupin. The lupin, for example, is planted as a rotation crop every 4 years on other land to restore the soil. So it drives nitrogen back into the soil and restores the soil health. And then the upcycled barley itself, because it's upcycled. So we actually partnered, it's just, it sounds like a strange partnership until you understand it more, is that we partnered with Anheuser-Busch InBev, which is the world's largest brewer. And when you make beer, you only need to pull the starch out. And so you're left with the protein and fiber that's bound together. And that was either being thrown away or actually fed as animal feed. And so they figured out, and actually because of the game changers, they spent over $100 million building a factory in St. Louis, Missouri to upcycle this barley protein, because they thought, before, I think the executives at Anheuser-Busch probably thought that plant protein was a fad. And when they saw the game change in 2019, they realized it was the future. And so they thought we could do something great for the planet here and create this sustainable rhythm. So because it's upcycled in the third-party life cycle analysis, you still attribute some of the emissions and some of the water use and so forth to that essentially, byproduct. And so, but if you take all that into account, it's far more sustainable, obviously, than whey protein, but even than pea or soy. And the great thing is it's grown in America, whereas most protein powders that you buy out there, that protein came from China, which often has more heavy metals and doesn't meet the standards.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, no. So it's like, and actually the protein is made in a facility that's certified for baby formula, which has even higher standards again than for protein powders. So in terms of quality, it's just, there's really nothing that matches it. It's even got 20% more glutamine than whey, which has been shown to help with muscle recovery. So while also exceeding the threshold for leucine and essential amino acids. So yeah, the team really put a lot of effort into, between food scientists and sports dietitians, putting this together. But yeah, we're excited that it's out.
Really interesting. And what would you say to people who say, well, I thought we didn't need, supplements. I thought we didn't need extra protein. I thought protein.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have supplements. I think one of the dangerous things, though, sometimes in the vegan or plant-based movement is that people don't want to say we have to even be thinking about protein. So for the regular person that's not exercising at all, and I think everyone should be exercising if they're able to, is that you do need to be cognizant about protein. If you go plant-based or vegan, you don't just take the meat off the plate and eat the rice and vegetables that were left or whatever. You do have to be cognizant about your protein, and especially if you're active. So first of all, if you're a child, your protein requirements per kilogram are higher. If you're active or athletic, even if that's just going on hikes and, gentle runs, things like that, your protein requirements are higher. But certainly if you're trying to build muscle or maintain muscle mass, once you're older, your protein requirements go up. Like I'm 45 now. My protein requirements are higher than they would have been when I was 35. And sarcopenia, as you get older, losing your muscle mass, you really want to prevent that. Obviously, you can't just have protein. You do have to do some resistance exercise.
Yeah.
And whether that's body weight or some weights or things like that. But your protein requirements do go up when you're athletic or any of those sort of categories that I talked about. And so you do have to be cognizant. You can do it from whole foods, certainly, but it's, if you want an easy, convenient, delicious way to do it, then protein powder is a way to do it. And it's not as though people on omnivorous diets aren't doing it. Over 50% of amateur athletes take protein powder, usually whey, and over 80% of elite athletes, according to studies, have protein powder anyway. So it's funny to say, oh, well, if you're vegan, you have to have protein powders. One, you don't have to, and two, it's just a simple switch. And I love those simple switches. Like if you're doing whey protein, which a lot of people are lactose intolerant, right? And then a lot of people have milk allergies or other things, and a lot of people, it just doesn't sit with their stomach well. That's one of the things that we've got with our protein, is people saying digests really well, because it is highly digestible. And so making that simple switch from whey protein to plant protein, and same with milk. If you're doing cow's milk, you can do soy milk or hemp milk, one of these other milks. There's simple switches that you can make to shift towards a healthier, more planet-friendly diet.
Got it. Yes, agreed. And for you, James, now in your life, at this point you are, just for the listeners, what are some of the things you do on a daily basis, besides eating, whole food, plant-based diet, to keep yourself healthy and active holistically?
So, exercise is a big thing for me, right?
What's your current routine? Training?
It's hard to say I have an exact routine. I go to the gym and do some compound lifts. I do like to make sure I'm getting in quite a bit of rotational stuff, because I feel like, there's a lot of pushing and pulling at the gym. But if you look at all sports or fighting or any of that, really, a lot of, if you're swinging a bat or punching or throwing or kicking, there's a lot of rotational stuff that people really don't do. So you can have all these big muscles, but if you don't have good rotation for a lot of sports, or especially for fighting, whether you're throwing, punching, kicking, you need rotational stuff. So I'll do like medicine ball throws against the wall. And so sometimes I'll lift weights. Sometimes I'll do a high intensity interval training. So I'll use that ski erg. I don't know if you've seen those.
Yeah, I just tried that the other week.
Yeah. So I'll do 20 seconds sort of regular, and then 10 seconds all out. And I'll do that for 5 minutes. Then I'll do the same on the rowing machine. I'll do the same on the assault bike. Or sometimes I go outside and run steps, sprinting steps and walking back down.
Mm-hmm.
I like going on hikes with the kids and the dogs as well.
I know I've heard you say, James, that you don't necessarily like training just to train, or working out just to work out. So is it harder to do these things without competition or without something, kind of a goal that you have set?
Yeah, a little bit sometimes. Especially running. I do not like running, but I like having run. So I'm just like, it's that, that feeling that you get afterwards. No, I'm motivated by staying healthy, trying to stay in shape. I still do jujitsu, which I really enjoy doing. I don't enjoy the weights that much, but I like feeling strong, and and I want to maintain that strength really as I get older. So there's a bit more motivation for lifting weights now than perhaps there was before. But I'm stronger than I ever was, even though I'm 45. So and people are saying, oh, you have to build all that muscle on meat, and plants can only maintain it. And I just posted something about, I don't know if you've seen Adam Sudd. I think his handle's like the Plant-Based Addict, but I think he lost like 150 pounds of fat and went down to 150. And then he added, in a year and a half, added 25 pounds of muscle, all plant-based. And so it was kind of a double transformation, which is kind of cool, because a lot of people say, oh, well, you built all the muscle on meat and you only maintained it. But, he was a great example of losing all that fat, getting healthier off his medication, didn't need his diabetes medication, all this stuff. And then also, then you see him going from pretty skinny and running to putting on all that muscle. I think that's pretty cool. And so I've got stronger since I've gone plant-based, and, continue to do so. So, I'm feeling great. So yeah, mainly exercise. I go in the sauna quite a bit. I haven't really jumped on the cold plunge trend, although I've done it, occasionally.
How come?
How come I haven't jumped on it?
Yeah.
I think if I had one in the backyard, I would. There's not one gym I go to. It's more like, a timing issue. I think there's some benefits, although I also think like people jump on some of these things when they haven't sorted out their nutrition, their sleep, their exercise. Like, I think that's where time should be spent, like stress reduction. I think those things are probably more important than like, okay, you've got to do the sauna, a few times a week, or you've got to do the cold plunge. So I don't think that there's benefits. But then the same thing you get for supplements, right? It's like people go through these things like, oh, you've got to take this supplement or this particular superfood or whatever. And I just don't like, yeah, sure, there might be some benefit. Like I take turmeric, for example, pretty much every day.
But get back to the basics, like, eat whole foods.
I eat a Brazil nut every day for selenium. I don't have to do that, but there's certain things that I do. But yeah, eat a predominantly whole food, plant-based diet. Or exclusively. I mean, I'm not exclusively whole foods. I do have this protein powder, and and I'm not like a perfect whole foods eater. Sometimes I'll eat a vegan pizza, or well, someone gave me a cookie yesterday. So it's not, I'm definitely not perfect, but predominantly eating whole plant foods, just plenty of legumes, beans, peas, lentils, nuts and seeds, whole grains. Just centering your diet around that. And I think that's the other thing is that people say, okay, well, you're eating this 10%, but let's say you're eating 5 or 10% of junk food. But if you're eating animal products, you're probably eating the 5% of junk food and 5-10, or, even if you're just eating mainly plant-based, you're probably also eating 5-10% of animal foods and 5-10% of junk foods. Right. And now you're less. So the easiest thing, I think, for me, it's easier to draw a line in the sand and just not eat animal products. And I haven't eaten any meat, fish, dairy, or eggs for 12 years now. Which is when I started the documentary, in the very first stages, when I started trying it, when I was filming with my own camera. I had to use camera from Craigslist. I had no funding. I learned how to do 3-point lighting on YouTube, and which is how I pretty much learned everything on YouTube, like how to fix the dishwasher or install it. Just go on YouTube. But yeah, so I haven't eaten any meat, fish, dairy, or eggs for 12 years now and feel good, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here, for sharing all that you shared today. And where we'll put all the links, of course, in the show notes. But where should people go to check out you and what you're doing now?
So my Instagram is Lightning Wilks. I'm not great at posting on there. I'm trying to post a little bit more. And then Game Changers Movie is the film website, and we'll be posting about Game Changers 2 on there. And then our Instagram for the brand for Phyta, which, by the way, is derived from the Greek word for plants, Phyta.
I meant to ask you that. I'm so glad, because I was like, this sounds like fighter, but not.
Yeah, it sounds like,
is that,
in British English, it sounds exactly the same. And
right?
It's similar.
So that worked out perfect.
Yeah, so that was a name I came up with. I thought that was
it.
Double play on words. But yeah, Phyta Fuel is the Instagram handle for the brand. And then we can give a link for your listeners to get a discount to buy some Phyta if they're interested as well.
Thank you. We will put that all in the show notes. I can't wait to try it myself. And again, thank you. Thank you for everything you do for people, for animals, for the planet. I appreciate you.
Likewise. No, thanks so much.
Hey.